Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. This is the next webinar in the Productivity and Profitability webinar series that's being brought to you by Meat and Livestock Australia and Agrista. This series is designed to provide timely and topical information relevant to producers across Australia. My name is Tanisha Shields, and I am a consultant with Agrista. I will be your host for tonight's webinar. Tonight, we'll be hearing from Phil Graham, who will be providing us with a seasonal update, explaining what the current forecast means and the implication of this forecast for producers. Before I hand over to Phil and we can get into the exciting stuff for the evening, I would like to cover off on the housekeeping topics for tonight. So tonight's webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of this recording following the webinar, and it will also be available on the Agrista and NLA websites. And throughout the webinar, if you have any questions to ask of Phil, we will be addressing your questions at the end of Phil's presentation. We're using Slido for you to ask your questions. So to access the Slido, there's a Slido icon at the top of your team screen, which is the little S button you can see in the red circle there on the screen. If that doesn't work for you, you can also head to slido.com, enter the code PPAugust to ask questions, Phil. As I mentioned, tonight's speaker is Phil Graham. Phil has worked with producers in livestock industries across Southern Australia for over 40 years. He spent 30 years with the New South Wales Department before starting his own business, Graham Advisory. Thanks, Phil. Thanks for coming along tonight, and over to you.
Thanks, Tanisha, and good evening, everyone. Next, please. I just want to start off with this question: do we need a big spring? I'm getting the feeling for over about the last month, I think people have started jumping at the shadow called El Nino, and aren't necessarily, I think, thinking through the issues. So this is some work I've done on the southwest slope, southern tablelands of New South Wales. It's just looking on the y-axis is the amount of feed grown between the 1st of September and the 31st of December. Now, this is using weather data from 1982 to 2022, so 40 years of data. And then we've got operating profit across the bottom. So down in the bottom left-hand corner, there's actually six dots there, which are the failed springs that have occurred over that period. But once we get over a particular threshold, and often when I'm talking to producers, you all know when you've got a spring. You know, it's just something, yes, I'm short or I'm there. If we get over that mark and we've got a spring, if we start looking at the impact on operating profit, whether it's a tight spring or a big spring, it really doesn't make much difference to profitability. Now, in your situation, I have standard prices and costs through here. In your situation, you get the vagaries of markets, which will move it around. The underlying factor is we don't need big springs to make money. And why is that? Because the bigger the spring, the lower the pasture quality, the lower the digestibility. And we've all seen that over the last 3 or 4 years. I don't think I've spoken to a producer in the last 2 years who's been happy with the growth rates in lambs or steers. If spring is a bit on the tight side, the quality is better, so therefore stock do better, right? So yeah, we have this inverse relationship: big springs, low digestibility; small springs, high digestibility. So we end up getting this point that in your thinking, I think all you need to think about at present: can I or am I going to get a spring? Forget about this idea that it has to be a big spring. That's just nonsense. We don't need that. Next, please. What controls the size of your spring in terms of herbage mass? 3 main things: soil moisture at the end of winter, and I'm not meaning winter as of the 31st of August. It's going to vary. So some of the people who are on tonight, winter for them might already have finished and spring growth started. For other people, winter's not going to finish to the middle of September. So wherever it depends, it's what the soil moisture is at that point of time, what the herbage mass you've got on the ground at that point of time, and the third most important thing is spring rainfall. It's the combination of those three things which determines how big our spring is. So tonight, I just want to step through those three things. And I'd actually like you, as we go through, to do a self-assessment and maybe just rate where you think you are in terms of the good, average, or poor for each of these three factors. The fourth factor, which is in smaller writing because it's helpful, but it's of a lower value, is the condition of our stock at the start of spring. If we've got good condition on our stock, it provides us a slight extra buffer. It gives us a bit of flexibility in terms of what we might do in spring and summer. But the important three: soil moisture, current soil moisture, current herbage mass, rainfall in spring. Next, please. Bomb and El Nino, two words you've heard a lot about. In some regards, I think we've heard too much. What is El Nino? It's a measure of climatic conditions in the middle part of the Pacific Ocean. That's what it is. Water temperatures, directions of winds, etc. Any comments about rainfall is based on correlations from previous El Nino events. Just because we get this set of conditions in the Pacific doesn't guarantee what rainfall is. Australia is a big continent, and the strength of those correlations across Australia are going to vary, and they can vary quite substantially. The relationship between spring and summer rainfall in central Queensland in an El Nino event is radically different to what the effect is in Tasmania or parts of Victoria, parts of New South Wales. And with the media, what we don't hear are those subtleties. We just hear the big numbers. And for a lot of parts of Australia, the Indian Ocean and the Great Southern Ocean are just as much importance. So what I want to do is just look at what local data is available to help us to get an indication ourselves of, are we going to get over that threshold of a spring, yes or no? Next, please. First thing I've got up is the water outlook, which you can find on the BOM site. Go down to agriculture, go into the 3-month forecast, and you'll find it in there. So this is about the only thing where everyone can get a picture of where soil moisture is. Now, the one I've got on the screen is dated the 31st of July. The latest one up on the website will be the 8th of August. And what's showing there is the relative soil moisture in the root zone. So we can see dry along the parts of New South Wales, especially the south coast of New South Wales is one of the driest. We've got that dry patch in WA. We've got an above average moisture through the centre. And we can see where it is in Tassie. So this is, if you've got nothing else to go on, you've got something in this one. I think for some parts of Australia, that's all you'll have. In other parts, we can get better information. The finer the detail you can get, but the better it is. The one thing I would say, if you're at the extremes, this is going to stack up pretty well. So if you're in the very lowest two categories or the two very wettest categories, it's most likely going to give a very good correlation with what we're seeing locally. It's when we get into that middle territory where there might be a bit of noise. Next. Now we've jumped down to the soil moisture monitoring tool. This is on the Ag Victoria website. This has been up and running for 3 or 4 years now. So each one of those dots is a soil moisture probe. Some of those are in cropping country, some of them in pasture country. So they've got a very good distribution across the state in terms of moisture probes. Now, you'll just have to excuse me. I am fighting a cold and the voice is struggling. Let's just go to the next slide so we can get some idea what the colour coding means. So this is one of the sites we've opened up. If we look at the dashboard, right in the middle there, 4 colours. I'll call it blue above 75, then green, then yellow, then red. So straight away, we'll go back and look at that screen then to tell us what it means about the state of Victoria. So if you look now at the state, the vast majority of the sites are that blue colour, which means soil moisture is above 75%. If you're in between those dots, it's highly likely you're going to be in exactly the same scenario. So we've got a bit of a dry patch over in the Gippsland. Now, some of those sites, I went into them and they didn't actually come up with data. So whether it is truly dry or whether we got some probe issues, I'm not sure. But you get very quickly, we can sit there and say the vast majority of Victoria is sitting in very good moisture profiles for this time of year, and that's about 4 days old. That screenshot. Next, please. Go again. Next, please. That's it. Went too far. Sorry. You must excuse me. I will get through the night. Now, this was the site in the Western Victoria over near the South Australian border, which was yellow. You can see when we go in there that it's just dropped below the 50%. So we've got those three little markers. One's the current, one's a month ago, and one's a year ago. So that site has in fact got more soil moisture now than it had this time last year. And we can see the various moisture at depths. And what those percentages are telling us is of the available moisture in the soil, the moisture in the soil that's available to the plant, that's how much is there on this day. 75%, 67, 46, 45. You get the picture. So you're getting a view of the moisture profile down through the soil. Now, this site, you can see up the top, is a loosened site. Now, it could well be where this site sits, that this lucerne has been growing very strongly. And part of the reason this site is drier than the rest of the sites in Victoria is the lucerne has grown a lot. We could have 3 tonne of dry matter above the ground. It sucked the moisture out. So the probe gives us some indication. It doesn't give us the full picture. And I'd be a bit along the lines that in fact it could be the strength of the lucerne which has tended to dry this site out compared to the other sites in Victoria. As you go into these pages, there's more information explaining those sort of things. So it's a great site, great coverage of Victoria. So anyone there can use this to get an idea of where they're sitting in terms of current soil moisture. And as a state, Victoria right now is looking good. Next. The next site I want to go to is in fact a new one. It's been up for about 18 months. It's called Farming Forecaster. It's farmingforecaster.com.au. This started off as a project in the southeast region of New South Wales. There were 3 producer groups there: Bookham Agricultural Bureau, Tablelands Farming Systems Group, and the Monero Farming Systems Group, in conjunction with the Southeast LLS. Started putting probes in the ground about 10 or 12 years ago. In fact, Bookham put their first probe in the ground in 1998. And they started using these probes, developed a website, and they started, the feedback from producers was strong, and they kept adding things onto it. And they got to the point where they had a product they were very happy with. The one complaint from them was that they didn't see the information frequently enough. They got some information twice a year and they wanted it monthly. Luckily, those 4 parties came together and were lucky to get federal government funding to in fact automate a lot of the processes. We're doing exactly the same thing that we're being done with producers 10 years ago, but it's now automated so we can do more sites. It's now started to get a bit of a roll on, and you can see the various areas around Australia now that have sites. So in New South Wales, they're based on LLS regions. There's Central Tablelands, 10 sites. Hunter has 19. Murray has 6, but that's going to 10. Riverina has 20. Southeast ACT is 50. Tasmania's grabbed hold of it very strongly. There's 36 at present, but by the end of the year, that'll be close to 50. And Western Australia, over around the Albany region, has about 20 sites. So that's the first page you get to. You click to the region that you want to look at, and you'll get more details. Next. So if we look at the screen on the left-hand side, you're seeing something that looks very similar to what we just saw when we looked at the Victorian site. That's the moisture probe. The depths of the sensors is different. In Victoria, the sensors were every 10 centimetres. These probes, the sensors are only every 20 centimetres. But it's the same information. So for this site at Bookham, west of Yass, at present, this was up to date 2 days ago. That site is currently sitting at 100% moisture. In fact, it's waterlogged. I'm not going to go into the probe information on this site anymore. One of the great things that happened here is that the staff in the southeast and the staff in Victoria spoke together, and they came up with a common way to display the information. So if you look at this or you look at the Victorian site, it's displayed the same way. Too often, different groups go and use different ways to display the same information. It just makes it difficult for producers. I want to congratulate the staff in Victoria and in Southeast LLS for showing some common sense and getting some commonality of how we display information to producers so they can make meaningful decisions from it. So this is the top of the screen. I'll come back to what's on the right-hand side in a while. Next, please. As we go down the screen, there's 3 blue buttons there, which I've circled in red. One says View Regional Map, which we're going to do in a while. One says More Probe Detail, one says More Pasture Detail. So all you've got, it's a bit like the Victorian one. I just showed you the front screen. We went in a little bit, but you can keep going down and there's more information on that Victorian one than what I showed you. It's the same here. You click the More Probe Detail or you click the More Pasture Detail and there's more information underneath. One thing that is in here is down in the bottom left-hand corner is the weather information, because the producers said we just want to go to one site. We don't want to have to go off to 2. So if we come here, we can pick the weather data up at the same time. And you'll pick up the same data in there that you'll pick up off Met-High from the bomb. So it's just to make it easy. So now what I'm going to do is flick round the regional maps of the sites in New South Wales, in fact, the sites in Australia, and just look at where soil moisture is similar to what in Victoria. We could just look at it on one page. For here, we've got to look at a few different pages. So next, please. So this is the regional map for the Hunter LLS. So you've got Newcastle, Nelson Bay down in the bottom right-hand corner. Out on the left-hand side, we're out at Cassilis, Merriwar. In this site, there's only three colour schemes, not 4 as in Victoria. If it's above 75%, it's green. If it's between 25 and 75, it's brown. If it's less than 25, it's red. And the numbers in there are giving you the idea of, rather than going to have to look at all the probe detail, it's just basically averaged that across the depths and showing you a figure. So there are parts of the Hunter where things are looking tough. That's all you can say. Those sort of numbers in the red, there's be virtually no pasture growth going on with those sort of moisture levels. 2 localities have picked up, have got some green, and most of the sites in brown are below 50%. So the Hunter at present is not sitting in a great position. That's just the state of play. Next. So this is now the central tablelands. Is sort of in the Bathurst orange region across the bottom, and we're getting out Canowindra, Cumnock, and then we're up north of Mudgee for the highest dot. Again, we've got good moisture in the high parts at the south. As we get up in the northwest corner, it's drying a bit. And the one thing that you will find over time, you do get trends with these things. So you can see either a drying or wetting influence coming on. So it's important with any of these that you go and look at what's happening in a region. Just don't get hung up on looking at what's happening at one particular locality. So again, these were up to date as of 2 days ago. And this information's updated every day. Next. So this is the southeast region. We've got Canberra down near the bottom left, going as high up as up into the Abercrombie, heading up to Cowra. We're at Burra out to the left-hand side, and we're onto the Southern Highlands on those red dots on the right. You'll notice here a real trend that where the green is, it's the influence of those winter fronts coming through. And then we've got the patch of brown and the reds. The rain hasn't got over the range. So as we saw before with the bomb data, the south coast of New South Wales was incredibly dry. And this is tending to show it up as well. There's one anomaly that stands out there is you've got those two square dots in the Southern Highlands and you've got a green one in the middle that just doesn't make sense. Well, you're right. Someone went and dropped 20 tonne of poultry manure on top of the probe site. So effectively that probe's not telling us anything anymore. So until all that material's moved away and we allow things to recalibrate, it's useless to us. And there's another little of anomaly. There's over on the left-hand side, there's a square red box. That just doesn't make sense when you look at all the sites around it. They've got very good moisture. So we just might have an issue there that needs to be looked at. The other thing you might notice is that some are circles and some are squares. The circles is where there's a probe in the ground, so that's firing information out, in fact, a number of times a day. Certainly gets updated every day. The square boxes are where there's just a pasture forecast in, so there's no probe in the ground, and that was just from a cost basis. It's cheaper to build the virtual sites than put the probe in. That's the most expensive part. And the numbers in there are the amount of moisture that the models worked out that the plants can see. So the same colour scheme is employed. And a number of those square sites, I know the LLS in this region is putting more probes in over the next couple of months. So some of those square sites will by next year go to probes. Next. We've now jumped into the Riverina. If we look on the western boundary, draw a line from Temora down to the Rock, Henty, that's your left-hand edge, and the right-hand edge is just to the east of the Hume Highway. You'll notice these are all squares. Well, not all of them, but just about. The Riverina LLS, when they were putting it in, we're going to use the existing probe network that's out there due to crop programs, but unfortunately that didn't materialise. So they are in the process of putting probes in at most of those sites. So again, in another 6 months, they'll move from just virtual sites to full sites. Just some interesting things that's going on. If I showed you, if we met a week ago, those probes on the left edge, the western edge, were all green. So in 1 week, they've gone from green to brown. The drying effect is started, and in fact, a number of the probes on the eastern edge were green. So in the last week, we've seen soil moisture move from in the above 75 below, but at the same time, especially on that western edge, we've also seen a lot of pasture growth. So it's a bit like that side in Victoria. We've got this balance going on. If we're growing grass, we're sucking moisture out of the soil. So the moisture information is telling us things are drying, but if that's drying because we've got growth, we're ahead and not behind. Next, please. I just realised I left out Murray. There is sites in the Murray LLS. We've jumped down to Tasmania. And there are a few sites. I couldn't fit some of the sites on Flinders Island, and there's one site further south, but that's a view of what's happening in Tassie. Good moisture up in the north. The east coast and down south, not so good, and some situations there that are pretty tight. Interestingly, if we'd looked at this a month ago, the sites on the east coast were all red. At the start of July, things were looking pretty dire for them, and then one rain event turned them from red to green. They're moving now back into brown, but they've grown grass in that period of time. So again, we're getting this balancing act. And Tassie will, in fact, just about fill in. There's another 6 or 7 sites to go in the Midlands. And they have plans to put sites across the northwest coast as well. So by the end of the year, all of Tasmania will be pretty well covered, providing information to producers. Next. You jump across to Western Australia. They've got 5 probes in the ground. They've got a lot of weather stations. They've got 20 odd weather stations through this area. That's what they wanted to get up first. And then the idea was over time, they'll build a probe network as well. Again, just looking at that data, that one red one just does not make sense. And I'd think if we went looking, there's an issue with that probe, which is giving faulty information. For the evenness of the numbers, the 3 brown ones, they're all of a similar number. We know the way the rainfall comes. Logic says that red one just isn't quite correct. Next, please. So now we've gone through and looked at soil moisture information. We looked at the BOM data to start off with. We then looked at the probe info, the very good probe network that Victoria's got, and then the probe network that Farming Forecaster is building. And certainly Farming Forecaster is still in a stage of expansion and is looking for new groups to come on board. It's now run by a not-for-profit organisation where the controlling people are producers. Now, if we look at the right-hand side, this is the pasture forecast. So this is for the Stock and Bingle site in the southwest slopes of New South Wales. At this stage, there's no probe in the ground. That's why there's nothing on the left. Let's just zero in on this graph and make some sense of what we're seeing. The shaded colouring behind, so there's red, brown, and green shading. That's historical data worked out using weather data from 1993 to 2022. So there's 30 years of historical weather data for this site. The reason that's there is to give you a reference point of how this year compares to previous. So in the really tough years previously, on the 1st of August, where the white hits the red, that's how much green feed available it was in the paddock. And you keep moving up. So where the red hits the brown, that's the 25%, 1 in 4 line. Where the brown meets the green, that's the 50-50. And at the top of the green's the 90%. There is a code over on the right-hand side. So it's to provide you a reference of what's happened in the past. So this is model data out of Grassgrow. Grassgrow is a program developed by CSIRO. It was released commercially in 2000. I've used it with producer groups now for nearly 25 years. How do we check that what it's come up with is solid? Producers provide some information about their farm setup, pasture types, livestock numbers, soils, timing of events, when do I sell, when do I lamb, when do I calve, etc. Farm systems built, and some information's given back to the producer, and for it to go up on the site, the producer's got to tick off and say, this is providing a robust representation of what is happening on my place. It is not a complete copy of anyone's place. It's a robust representation of reality. It's picking up the variation within the year. It's picking up the variation between years, all of those sort of things. So it's the producers who are giving, if you like, the quality control that what goes up here is relevant. So that's the historical data, that shading behind. The lines are the forecast. So at present, if you look down the bottom, you'll see August, September, October, November. So this forecast is going from the 1st of August to the end of November. This forecast, those coloured lines, are produced on the 1st of every month. So on the 1st of September, a new forecast will be done for September, October, November, December. So there's always 4 months and it's updated every month. Black line is what happened in the month of July. So the first thing that stands out on this side is that the current situation is very good compared to historical data. And in fact, I was out at Stock and Bingle with some producers a week ago, and the comment that was made to me was, we are embarrassed by the amount of food we've got, which is backing up exactly what this is saying. Now, down the bottom, we get some growth rate data. That's the growth rate that's occurred in the last, that would have been the last 7 days of July, that sort of growth's occurring. So things are certainly starting to move out there. Next, please. I now want to explain how we generate these forecasts. We run the program. All of Australia is split up into 5 kilometre square grids. So it's possible to get daily weather data for all these 5K square grids around Australia. So we get the nearest 5K square grid to the Stock and Bingle site. We download that weather data. So we download weather data from 1980 through to the current. We run it. Now, this is just an example I've done, and this example's gone from the 20th of June to the end of August. So I would have run the program up until the 19th of June because that's the last date I could get measured weather data for this location. The program then stores the ending information for that day. How much moisture's in the soil, how much pasture's in the paddock, what's the weight of the animals. Stores an incredible amount of data. We then get the program to go and grab the daily weather data from the 20th of June, for this example, from the 20th of June to the end of August for 1993. And if we got that weather at this locality, there's that blue dotted line. That would be the pasture curve that occurred if we got the over this period of doing here. If we got the 1993 weather, that's what would have happened to pasture, given the state that we're in on the 19th. The standout is if we got the weather from 207, you can see the red line, and then there's all the others. Now there's 9 there. We do this for 30 years. So we take the daily weather data from 1993 through to 2022, and we draw 30 potential pasture curves from the same starting point. What's the moisture in the ground now? If we put the 30 up, it'd be a spaghetti graph and no one could make sense of it. So we put it up as percentiles. We go to the next one, please. Actually, we've got another one in between. So this is the weather data. This is the rainfall data for Stock and Bingle between the 1st of August and the end of November from 1993 to 2022. So this was the rainfall data that was used to generate the lines we're going to look at in a minute. So the standout year, 206. I don't think we even got to 50 mils in those 4 months. 19 wasn't much better. 22, 500 mils. So all that variation in rainfall and temperature, all of those things are taken account when we draw these potential forecast lines. We're not saying which one of those would follow. We're just giving you the odds of which way it might go. So that's an indication of the variation in rainfall that's gone into making up data on the next page. Thank you. So just let's focus on the left-hand side. So this is the Stock and Bingle. Nothing's changed, exactly as it was before. So instead of just presenting 30 random lines, we presented in either a 10, a 25, a 50, a 75, or a 90% line. You select the ones you want. I've dropped the 90 out of it. I've just selected the 4. You can see some people I know a producer in Tasmania, he just looks at the lowest 2 because he's always trying to see what the absolute downside is. So the black line is what happens in July, and then the forecast is done. So if we get an incredibly dry period at Stock and Bingle between now and the end of November, pasture supply could run along that red line. 1 in 4 chance of running along the brown line, 50-50 along the yellow and the green up the top. So if you like, they are 4 fodder budgets using a range of different pasture growth rates. And no one will be able to ever give you growth rates for a 10% year because we've never measured them. So that's climatology. When we use previous weather data, it's called climatology. We now go to the right-hand graph. You'll notice down in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little button, and next to it says Access S. The shading, this is for Stock and Bingle. With both Stock and Bingle, the shading's exactly the same. The black line's exactly the same. Difference with Access S, it's the program that BOM used to generate their seasonal forecast. So the Access program is sucking information daily about what's happening, the weather and climatic factors around Australia, what's happening in the Pacific, what's happening in the Indian Ocean, what's happening in the Great Southern Ocean, wind direction, cloud, all that information gets sucked into that program and it runs every day. And it generates 11 outputs of data. So for the graph on the right-hand side, we've got 30 years on the left-hand side. So we want a similar number on the right-hand side. To do that, we grab the outputs for the last 3 days of July. So the 31st of July, we grab the 11 Access S produced. We grab the 11 it produced on the 30th, and we grab the 11 it produced on the 29th. So we've ended up getting 33 forecasts of what might happen over the next 4 months. And we do exactly the same thing as we did with climatology, and we draw these potential pasture curves. Now, I want you just to have a look at between those two graphs and see where the difference is. The shading hasn't changed, so you can use the position on the shading to assess where the change is. I think you'll agree the red line basically hasn't moved. There's some little wobbling, but, you know, let's not get too finicky about things. What's really happened with the Access is the wetter ones have been flattened. I don't think it's any surprise, everything that's being said at present, that the chances of us getting wet outcomes in this spring are highly remote, and that's really what the Access program's saying. But it isn't saying that the dry end is going to be any worse. The red lines haven't changed for this locality. Now, this site, if you look at where it is compared to historical, it's still very high. I reckon by the time producers out there get to the end of September, they'll be saying very confidently, I have a spring and everything's fine. So really what's going to happen in October and November doesn't really matter. If we go back to that initial premises I made that we don't need big springs, once you get over that line of a spring, I think things for the next 4, 5, 6 months are travelling okay. So at this site, to me, there's a high degree of confidence, regardless of which of those graphs you use, that they're going to get a spring and they'll be travelling okay. Next slide, please. We've lost. My fault. This is I apologise. I did not, in fact, send the right file through. That's all my doing. But we can just focus on the left-hand side. This is a site called Paddys River. It's 20 kilometres west of Goulburn. So the first thing to notice is let's look where the black line started. The black line started up in the green territory. So at the in early July, things were travelling along very nicely, but then the black line tracked in the wrong direction. And the starting point for August is down where the red hits the brown. So that's at the 25% level. That's a 1 in 4 scenario. We then put climatology over the top of that, and there's no, I don't know that I feel that confident that I'm seeing a recovery occurring there. Now, if I had done what I should have done and provided you the graph which had the access data on the right-hand side, you know what we saw, what happened with access at Stock and Bingle? It pushed the green and the yellow and the brown tighter, lower. Well, it did exactly the same for this site. And really, it was pushing it down. In fact, the brown line and the red line ended up down in that white territory. Very difficult scenario. And even though here we are in early August, I think the chances of this locality in getting a spring is highly unlikely. Now, this is an area which can cop summer rain off the coast. So potentially they can, in fact, could get out of jail later on, but spring's looking pretty dire, and I don't think there's much chance now for that to be turned around. So there's a whole range of sites with this information. What you do is you go in, look at sites around you, get an idea of what the trend is. If we went 30 kilometres to the west of that, we suddenly find that a lot of the sites are indicating they most likely are getting a spring. So we're actually defining where the line is between things are looking okay and things are looking disastrous. So if you look at a number of sites, you can pick up these regional trends, which is of value. So we can use this to get an idea about where herbage mass is going. You've got an idea of where herbage mass is sitting yourself. Next one, please. This is straight off the bomb site. Rainfall predictions. Often we see the one on the left, which is chances of being receiving above median rainfall. To some degree, I don't find that very useful. To be useful, you need to know what median is, and most of us don't. Whereas the one on the right is exactly the same information, except you can present a graph for a certain amount of rain, and this is for the month of September. And I've put up 25 mils, and you see a graph there of the likelihood of 25 mils or exceeding 25 mils across Victoria and New South Wales. And you can hone in and look at this in more finer detail than what I've got on the screen. I think this is a far more useful way for producers to look at the potential rainfall. You know, in your mind that, is 25 mils in the month of September going to make any difference for you? And for some people on tonight, it will be, yes, 25 mils in September will definitely get me over the line. I'll have a spring. And for other people, 25 mils in September is not going to do anything for me. So I think it's a lot better to look at that right-hand one than just this, the median one. And I'd much prefer anything ever appearing in the press to be in the right-hand form. And you can decide you can go 10 mils, 50 mils, etc. Thank you. Rightio, last one. So what's your assessment being a spring? Where's your soil moisture? Where's your current pasture? What's the likelihood of rain for you in your area? Unfortunately, I think there's going to be people on tonight whose assessment would have ended up being poor, mainly because current soil moisture is poor, herbage mass is poor, and the likelihood of rain, the substantial rain you need, is pretty low. So in that case, to me, you should be already deciding on or already implementing your strategy for managing your livestock enterprise through this event. I just want to remind people or make people aware there was a program called Stock Plan developed by New South Wales DPI back in the late 1990s, used very extensively during the dry periods of 2000s in a number of states around Australia. It is still the best program for people to work out what their strategy might be if you're in a very difficult situation. Unfortunately, we tend to have a great history in this industry of thinking if something's 10 or 5 years old, it's out of date, it's useless, we've got to get something new. this product doesn't go out of date. It will just be as relevant in 2035 as it is now. It's going to be supported by the LLS in New South Wales, and it's being supported. There is training going to occur in Tasmania with it. So there's at least 2 states. If you're in trouble, stock plan, see if you can get your hand on a copy of it. Very powerful tool. Producers have used it, said it's made a huge difference. If your assessment was good, well, you don't need to make any changes to your enterprise. All you're going to do is react to the changing pasture conditions over summer and make some decisions about when you might get stock off. You might sell them a bit lighter. You're in a position where you've got flexibility. I think it's highly likely that you'll most likely be feeding stock in late summer or autumn. But at the end of the day, that's not unusual. And if you've got to feed stock for 2 or 3 months, it's a vastly different situation than having to do it for 6 months. And for those who ended up sort of 50-50, well, all you can do is keep assessing it on a weekly basis until you decide what your position is. But please be realistic and honest with your assessment. Don't sort of drop into the case of, oh, no, the rain will get me out of a hole. It's unlikely the rain is going to get you out of a hole. So be honest with yourself. And sometimes it's a great value to, in fact, talk it through with someone who you respect and someone you trust. Making decisions in big dry events is not easy. And running those ideas past someone else can take some of the pressure off. And the last comment is just remember every dry event is different. So the plan you used in 2007 or 19 mightn't be the plan you should use in 23. Just remember in 19, stock prices were through the roof. So we could make destocking decisions and the money we got was substantial. That's not the case in 2023. So the plan that worked well in 2019 might need to be reassessed in 23 because of the change of stock values. Hope that's been of benefit. I think increasingly we're starting to get some better tools and information out there for producers to get a heads up on when and what's the risk of falling over that line or falling under the line or getting over the line. I suppose a key thing I want to say, just remember you only need to get a spring. It doesn't need to be a booming spring. I think people sometimes set their expectations of what they need to achieve higher than it really needs to be. And that's it. Tanisha, thank you.
Phil, that was absolutely great to hear about all the different programs that are available. I know I've certainly taken something away from tonight. We have a few questions that have already come through from the audience, but for those that joined late, to ask a question, you just click on the Slido icon at the top of your screen, or if that doesn't work, head to slido.com, enter the code PPAugust to ask those questions of Phil. The first question that I've got here, Phil, is what can I use if I don't have a probe near me?
Look, if there's no probe near you, you'll go back to the bomb, that big bomb picture, right? Just depends where you are. Ask around. There's a lot of probes being put in the ground over the last 20 years. And again, to some degree, it's a bit disappointing that we would have hundreds and hundreds of probes, but they've never been linked together such that we could see it all, which has been a bit of a waste of money. So ask around. Ask around. In cropping areas, a lot of probes have gone in. There might be probes in the area that you're not aware of. Ask the question and see what happens. If that comes up blank, well, all you can do is go back to that map on BOM, which gives you a big picture of where soil moisture is.
Thanks, Phil. And the next one that relates to that is, can anyone join the farming forecaster?
Yeah. There's no restrictions. Individuals can come on board, groups can come on board. This started off as a project in 2017 with 30 sites just in the southeast. It's now grown to 150 sites across parts of Australia. I'd love to see it get much bigger. And I suppose if people can, I suppose my details are there somewhere. If people got in contact put them in contact with the lady who looks after it.
Thanks, Phil, and I'm sure that we can make sure that people have access to those details as well. And the next question
Right.
that I've got here is, how does a virtual site work? You may have mentioned it earlier in the webinar.
A virtual site just hasn't got a probe, right? So we're getting no daily update of soil moisture at the various levels that we can see. A virtual site's just got the modelled farm producing the pasture forecasts. So for that stock and Bingle site I looked at, that's a virtual site. There was no probe data. We're just using, it was just the model data. Where does the model get its climate and rainfall from? It gets it from the 5 kilometre square grids that exist all over Australia. Right? And it's, a probe in the ground. You can, when the group was developing localities, you can build about 3 or 4 virtual sites for one full site. So it was a way of how do we get coverage across the area for a smaller amount of money. With all these things, money's limited, so you've got to try and bend it. I think you can put too many probes in. So to me, a mixture of probes and virtual sites makes a lot of sense and makes a better use of scarce resource money.
Excellent. And also, we've got another couple of questions, and then that will be us for the evening, Phil. But the next one I've got is, how do I find trends? You mentioned seeing pasture growth trends, also moisture trends. How does someone actually find what those trends are?
It's looking at the whether it's the Victorian side or whether it's the farming forecaster in the area you want to look at. Look at the regional map and look at it over time. You might look at it once a week. And what some people do is at the start of the week, they'll go in, they'll look at it, and they'll take a screen dump and park it in a file. And then they go in a week later and they pull that up and they see what's the change in soil moisture what's occurred over the last week. I mentioned in the Riverina one that a week ago, the western edge of the Riverina were all green. 1 week later, they've gone to brown. You see the trends, and it's in the southeast. It depends. Once summer comes along, we're most likely going to see the eastern probes turn green, and the western probes will be red because there's some moisture come in from the coast, hasn't pushed over the range. They've got rainfall, so over time you'll see these changes in reflecting the rainfall distribution and direction. So you get an idea, and the more probes we get. So as a person in the Riverina said to me the other day, they're encouraging for the probes to go further west, because if there's a series of probes 100k west of them, they're starting to get it. They're getting able to see the trend of drying as it's coming into them. So the bigger the network becomes, the more powerful the trend lines you start picking up.
Excellent.
So
Thanks,
you've
Phil.
got to go and look at data. There's no one point where you can say, oh, what's the trend? You've got to look at it.
And how often did you say weekly to be checking those trends if you're looking to make a decision?
Yeah, look, in the current scenario, I'd say it's weekly. In other parts of the year, it might be once a month that you might look at all. It just depends on how critical. We're in a very, very critical window right now. 2 or 3 weeks can make a huge difference. So we just noticed on the data on the website, usage has gone up dramatically in the last couple of weeks because people are going on and looking at it a lot more. Whereas in the middle of winter, there might have been no point to look at it. You look at it once a month and that's it. But right now, it's a critical window, and 2 or 3 weeks can make a big difference. Nothing beats timing of rainfall events in late winter and spring.
Phil, we've got a little bit of a slightly change of tact question come through here. How do you factor in spring temperatures? BOM is projecting many areas to be in the warmest 20% of all years. And does this concern you?
The forecast for temperatures is all factored into that, everything I've showed you. Temperatures included, rainfall's included, temperatures included, humidity, wind speed, solar radiation. There's eight factors of climatic data that we capture. That's all in the melting pot. It's there. So if BOM are forecasting increases in temperature, that will be included in that data we get from Access, which is included in what that output is. So it's all right. That's all taken account of in there.
Excellent. It's all considered. That's the last of our questions for tonight, Phil. Right on time to wrap up for the evening. Just before we finish the webinar, I just wanted to clarify with you the four platforms that you mentioned were the BOM Water Outlook, the Soil Moisture Monitoring Tool by Ag Victoria, the Farming Forecaster, and then the final one was the BOM Rainfall Outlook.
Correct.
And
so
if
that covers those really three big things that I think you got to look at.
Excellent. Thanks, Phil. And if anyone that's on tonight or watching this recording wants to access those tools, you can go back and look at the recording, see where Phil's linked to those as well. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And Phil, thank you very much for providing such a timely update on the seasonal forecast and what this actually means for producers and how we can access some localised information to make those decisions. Audience here tonight, thank you very much for joining. If you have any additional questions or suggestions for future webinar topics, please reach out by completing our survey. Your feedback's really important to us. So if you scan the QR code on your screen, that will take you to the follow-up webinar survey. If you're watching the recording, please also complete that survey. We value everyone's feedback and it's a great way for you to provide us with ideas for future topics and pick what you might like to talk about next or like us to talk about next on these webinars. Thank you again all for attending. Thank you very much, Phil. That was very interesting. I've really enjoyed this evening. And I look forward to seeing everyone again next month, where we hear from Dr. Penny Schultz on how to incorporate genetics into a value chain approach.
Thank you and best of luck to everyone.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everyone.